She didn't crawl out of the grave. She unfolded from it, long limbs cracking like dry branches, and she remembered my name. Nightbound Bloodline presents 5 very dangerous horror stories. What lies in the shadows of our world is not always a story. Sometimes it is a warning. The accounts you are about to hear were sent to us by ordinary people who stepped into the dark and found something staring back. They have asked for their names to be changed, but the terror in their words remains unaltered. Listen closely. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. Story 1. The Thing in the Fog at Devil's Run Bridge. Our first account comes from a man we'll call Ben, a long-haul trucker for 15 years. A man who's seen every empty mile of highway this country has to offer. He thought nothing on the road could surprise him anymore. He was wrong. My name's Ben. I'm 42. I drive an 18-wheeler from coast to coast, 5 days a week. My life is diesel coffee, talk radio, and white lines. I don't believe in ghost stories. My world is asphalt and way stations, things you can touch and log in a ledger. But there's a stretch of Old County Route, near the hollows of West Virginia, called Devil's Run. They say the fog there don't behave right. It was November, just past 3 a.m. I was behind schedule, took a shortcut I'd used before without issue. That night was different. A thick, pea-soup fog had settled in the valley, glowing in sickly orange under my high beams. It wasn't natural. It clung to the road like wet wool, deadening all sound. I had my window cracked, and the air, it was too still. No crickets, no owls, just the low rumble of my rig and the creep of that silence into my cab. I was coming up on the old iron bridge over Blackstone Creek. That's when I saw the first shape, just a darker patch in the fog on the shoulder. As I passed, my lights caught it. It was a deer. At least it had been. It was laid out on its side, rib cage opened up like a gutted fish. Steam, or maybe mist, was rising from the cavity. No blood on the road, just cleaned out. My hands tightened on the wheel. Animal attack, I told myself. Coyotes. But something in my gut, that primal knot, started to tighten. Coyotes don't leave a kill that neat. I rolled onto the bridge. The iron girders created a cage of shadows, flickering past. Halfway across, my engine coughed. Not a sputter, but a deep, choking gurgle. Then it died. Total electrical failure. Dashboard lights, headlights, radio, everything went black. I was plunged into a silent, orange-gray tomb. I cursed, fumbling for my flashlight. That's when I heard it. From the creek bed below the bridge. A sound like wet leather being stretched, then a heavy, dragging thump. I clicked on my flashlight, its beam cutting a pathetic cone through the swallowing fog. I swung it toward the passenger side window, and I saw it. Down the embankment, maybe 30 yards away. It was crouched over the water. At first, my brain screamed bear. But no bear is built that way. Its back was a series of sharp, bony ridges pushing against a slick, hairless hide that reflected my flashlight like wet clay. Its limbs were too long, joints bending in wrong places as it drank. It wasn't drinking. It had its face down in the creek, but its shoulders were working, heaving. It was pushing its head under the water, holding it there. I saw a thick, rope-like tail lying inert in the mud. Then, as if sensing the light, it stopped. It began to rise. Not a swift movement, but an uncoiling. 7 feet tall, maybe more. It turned. It had no eyes. Just smooth, sunken pits where they should have been. But its head, it was all jowl. A long, horizontal gash of a mouth, dripping creek water and black sludge. It didn't snarl. It gaped. And from that pit, a low, bubbling vibration reached me through the glass. It wasn't a growl. It was the sound a drain makes when it's choking. It took a step toward the bridge, then another. Its gait was a stiff, stilted shamble, like it was learning how to use its limbs. It didn't run. It just advanced with a terrible, patient certainty. It knew I was trapped. I was screaming inside my own head, frantically turning the key. Nothing. It reached the base of the iron bridge support. It lifted one of those long, slick arms, and it began to climb, not with claws. I couldn't see any, but its fingers adhered to the metal with a soft, sticky thunk with each pull upwards. Thuck, heave, thuck, heave. It was coming for me. Ben, my bladder let go. The warmth spreading through my jeans was a humiliating anchor to reality. This was real. This thing, this fouling of nature, was 15 feet below my cab and climbing. I pounded the dashboard, a sob ripping from my throat. Start, you bastard, start. On the third turn of the key, as the creature's head, that smooth, eyeless horror, cleared the bridge railing, my engine roared to life. Lights blazed. The radio screamed static. I didn't think. I slammed the gear shift and stomped on the accelerator. The tires screeched on the wet iron. As I lurched forward, I caught one last glimpse in my side mirror. It had hauled itself onto the bridge. It stood there in the glow of my taillights, fully upright, water and muck sloughing off its form. It didn't chase. It just watched me flee, its head tilted at an angle that screamed not of animal curiosity, but of recognition, like it was filing me away. I drove for 2 hours straight before I dared to pull over at a lit truck stop. I was shaking so bad I couldn't hold my coffee cup. I vomited in the parking lot. I never reported it. To who? The police? A wildlife officer? Excuse me, a hairless, eyeless bear thing tried to climb my truck on Devil's Run. They'd lock me up. I never took that shortcut again. I add 4 hours to my route now to avoid that whole state. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm on a lonely road and a patch of fog catches my headlights, I see that shape. I hear that wet, sticky thuck as it finds purchase. And I know, with a cold certainty, that it wasn't just drinking from that creek. It was waiting, and it remembers the taste of fear. A creature that waits, not in the wilderness, but on the forgotten byways we trust to carry us home. Ben's account chills me because it speaks of a predator that doesn't just hunt, it studies, and it turns our shelters into traps. Story 2, The Stones of Sighing Creek. Our next story comes from a woman we'll call Eleanor, a geologist with 20 years of field experience, a scientist who trusts in the immutable logic of stone and stratum. Her nightmare began not with a howl, but with a hum, a vibration from deep within the earth that should not exist. My name is Eleanor. I'm 58, and until last fall, I was a senior geologist for the State Survey. My life was rocks, the slow, billion-year poetry of the earth. I mapped the Sighing Creek Basin for a routine mineral survey. The locals had stories, of course. Said the creek sighed because it flowed over the buried bones of a lost tribe. Folklore. I had instruments, core samples, data. The anomaly showed up on the ground-penetrating radar first. A massive, hollow space about 50 feet down, directly under a circle of 9 standing stones on the bank. The stones weren't local granite. They were a type of basalt, glassy and fine-grained, foreign to the region. And they were warm to the touch, even at night. Not significantly, just a few degrees above ambient. A physical impossibility without a heat source. I decided to take seismic readings. I planted the sensors in a ring around the stones. When I triggered the small test pulse, the earth answered. It wasn't an echo. It was a response. A deep, subsonic thrum rose through the soles of my boots, up my spine, and settled in my teeth. My equipment went haywire, needles dancing. And then the sigh. It wasn't from the creek. It came from the ground itself. A long, low exhalation of air that smelled of ozone and deep, wet clay. It carried a sound on it. A whisper, layered 100 times over, in no language I knew. I should have left, but the scientist in me was captivated. This was an undiscovered phenomenon. I stayed past dusk, taking notes by my lantern light. That was my mistake. As the last light faded, the stones began to glow. A faint, bioluminescent blue pulsed within their glassy depths, synchronized with that slow, subterranean heartbeat. And the shadows they cast. They didn't match their shapes. The shadows were tall, thin, and spindly, and they moved, twisting slowly, independently of the stones. I froze, my pen dropping into the dirt. One of the shadows detached from the rest. It slid across the ground, not like a shadow, but like a stain. It pulled at the base of my tripod, then began to climb it against the angle of the light. It was a limb, a slender, grasping darkness. It touched my seismograph sensor. The machine screamed a raw, electronic shriek. And in that moment, the whispering from the earth crystallized into a single, clear sentence in my mind. Not heard, implanted. It said, "She is awake. We are found." I stumbled back, my boots crunching on the gravel. The shadow limb retracted, slipping back into the impossible pool at the stone's base. But the whispering in my mind didn't stop. It multiplied, a cacophony of frantic, ancient thoughts, all swirling around that one phrase, "We are found." It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of guilt, of exposure. I grabbed my gear, my hands clumsy with a fear I'd never known, not of the dark, but of a fundamental wrongness in the bedrock of reality itself. As I turned to run, I looked back at the stone circle. The glowing blue had intensified, and in the center of the circle, the earth bulged. It rose like dough, a slow, tectonic heave. And from within that rising mound, I saw shapes begin to press against the dirt from the inside. Not hands, not claws, indescribable outlines, long and jointed all wrong, straining to get out. I ran. I didn't feel the branches that whipped my face or the creek I splashed through. I ran until my lungs burned and the whispering faded to a dull, psychic ache behind my eyes. I made it to my truck and I drove. The image of that breathing earth seared into my mind. I filed no report. What would it say? Anomalous seismic activity correlated with paranormal shadow manifestation and psychic intrusion. They'd revoke my credentials. I took a sudden, early retirement. But the story doesn't end there. The whispers, they come back. Not often. Usually in the quietest moments, just before sleep. A faint, sibilant chorus. She is awake. And twice, I've seen the shadows. Not cast by anything in my home. Just dark, spindly stains on the wall, lingering for a few heartbeats before fading. They are checking on me. They know I know. My geology is a lie now. I thought the earth was a tomb of dead history. It's not. It's a prison. And whatever those stones are, wardens or markers, they are failing. I don't fear ghosts. I fear the day the ground opens up and the things that have been sighing in the dark for millennia finally decide to speak louder. A prison in the planet's crust. A warden of warm stone and colder shadow. Eleanor's story terrifies because it threatens not just our flesh, but our understanding of the world beneath our feet. It suggests a history written not in fossils, but in confinement. Story 3. The Photographer of Havenfall Portraits. Our third account comes from Leo, a portrait photographer who prided himself on capturing the true essence of his subjects. He worked in a historic district, in a studio that had been a funeral parlor a century before. He thought the stories of lingering energy were good for business, until he developed a photo that showed something that was never there. I'm Leo, 34. I own Havenfall Portraits. I've always believed a face tells a story. My studio is in the old Grimshaw building, built in 1898. Yes, it was a mortuary. Clients love the authentic vintage ambience. I love the Northlight windows. I'm a skeptic. I don't believe spirits leave imprints on film. Light and chemistry, that's my religion. The session was with the Millers, a lovely family. Parents, 2 young girls. We did the standard poses. At the end, as a joke, I suggested one spooky shot in the dimmer back room, near the original cast iron drain set in the floor, where they used to well. We all laughed. The girls made silly faces. I took the shot. I developed the film myself that night. The normal shots were perfect. Smiling, vibrant. Then I got to the last frame. The spooky shot. The family was there, their silly expressions frozen. But behind them, the room was wrong. It wasn't my back room. It was darker, colder. The walls were tiled in stark, white subway tile. And in the foreground, bisecting the frame, was the slender, polished leg of a porcelain table. My blood went cold. I looked closer. Standing between the two Miller girls was a figure. Tall, gaunt, in a dark, old-fashioned suit. Its face was a pale blur, like motion smudge, but its hands were crystal clear. Long, delicate fingers rested on each girl's shoulder. The fingers were too long, and they weren't resting. They were pressing down, the fingertips blanching the girls' shirts. The girls, in the photo, were still smiling, unaware. But the worst part was the figure's head. It was tilted, looking directly down the lens, right at me. And from the blur of its face, 2 points of light shone with terrible clarity. Not eyes, reflections. The twin, pinpoint reflections of my own darkroom safe light, mirrored in something that shouldn't have been there. I dropped the negative. I was sweating. I told myself it was a double exposure, a light leak, some freak flaw. But I knew my craft. This was no flaw. The figure was between the girls, behind them in perspective, but in front of them in the plane of focus. It was inside the moment. The red glow of a darkroom safe light washes over Leo's horrified face as he stares at the dripping photograph. The reflection points in the photo seemed to burn. I burned the negative. I melted it in the sink. I told the Millers there was a technical issue, gave them the other shots for free. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, a lone walk-in client came. An elderly man, elegant and quiet. He wanted a single portrait. For posterity, he said. His voice was dry, like pages turning. He insisted on using the back room. I felt a chill, but money was tight. I sat up. As I looked through the viewfinder, everything was normal. But when I developed his portrait, there were two figures. The old man, sitting stiffly, and standing just behind his shoulder, the same tall, blurred suit. The long-fingered hand was now on the client's shoulder, and the reflection points in the blurred face were brighter, sharper. They weren't reflecting my safe light this time. They seemed to be generating their own cold, gray light. That's when I noticed the pattern in the background. The white tiles, and on one, etched faintly as if by condensation, was a number, 1898. The year the building was built. The year the funeral parlor opened. The client never returned to collect his photos. The number in the book he'd left was disconnected. The encounters became procedural. It only happened with portraits taken in that back room. Always a single subject. And in the developed photo, the suit would be there, a step closer each time. First in the background, then beside them, then with a hand on them. The background details would shift, a glimpse of a porcelain table, a trolley wheel, a hanging scale. Tools of the mortician's trade. I tried to close the back room. I painted the walls, brought in bright lights. But in the photos, the tiles would still be there underneath, the suit's progress undeterred. It was learning the medium. It was using my camera as a doorway. The final straw was a self-portrait. I was arrogant, desperate for proof. I set the timer and stood in the back room. When I developed it, I was alone in the frame. But the suit wasn't behind me. It was in front of me, its back to the camera, facing me. Its blurred head filled the lens. And those two reflection points, they weren't reflections anymore. They were pupils, sharp, intelligent, and filled with a dreadful, photographic negative of the room. Of me, standing there, a tiny, inverted figure trapped inside each one. That's when I heard it for the first time. Not a sound in the air, but a sound in my mind, like the shutter click of an old box camera. And a single dry thought, almost developed. I emptied the studio that night. I left the equipment. I moved cities. I work in digital now, in a sterile, sunlit mall studio. But sometimes, when I'm editing a portrait, zooming in on the eyes, I fear I'll see a tiny, inverted image of a tiled room. And I know it's still there, in that building, waiting for the next photographer. It's not capturing souls. It's developing them. And my session, I fear, is not quite complete. A predator that exists not in the forest, but in the silver nitrate of old film. A hunger that feeds on remembrance and posterity. Leo's story chills because it perverts art into a ritual and turns every portrait into a potential invitation. Story 4. The radio signal from Greylock Ridge. Our penultimate story comes from Mara, a retired air traffic controller with an ear for patterns and a hobby of scanning ham radio bands. She sought silence in the mountains. Instead, she found a signal that spoke in a voice no human throat could produce, a broadcast that didn't just carry sound, it carried weight. My name is Mara, 61. I spent 30 years listening to the skies, directing voices in the void. In retirement, I wanted quiet. I built a cabin on Greylock Ridge. My hobby is radio. The static of the cosmos, the chatter of truckers. It's a comfortable white noise to me. I don't believe in ghosts on the airwaves. Noise is just noise. It started in late October. A new signal appeared on a supposedly dead frequency, just at the edge of the AM band. It was a voice, but processed through layers of distortion, reverb, and something that sounded like grinding stone. It wasn't speaking words. It was reciting numbers, coordinates, but they were wrong. They pointed to locations that didn't exist, or to spots in the middle of the ocean, or deep underground. And the voice, it had a physicality to it. A low, resonant thrum that made my fillings ache and the cabin windows vibrate softly in their frames. I logged it, a curiosity. Then, the messages changed. It began describing landscapes, the valley where the trees grow inward, the lake with no bottom, only a sky, impossible places. But as it described them, I'd feel a pressure in my head, and I'd see them. Not imagine. See, fractal forests twisting in on themselves, an abyss of water reflecting stars that were not our own. The signal was broadcasting more than sound. It was broadcasting perception. One night, during a description of the city of folded angles, the signal strength spiked. The voice dropped its effect. It became clear, cold, and horribly direct. It said, "You are a good listener, Mara. We have reviewed your control logs. Efficient. You may be suited for other traffic." My blood froze. I never gave my name on the air. I'd never transmitted on that frequency. I ripped the headphones off, but the voice wasn't just in them anymore. It was in the room, emanating from the radio's speaker, from the metal frame of my bed, from the fillings in my teeth. It was using the entire cabin as a resonator. I shut the radio off. The silence that followed was worse. It was a thick, listening silence. I went outside for air. The night was perfectly clear, but the stars, they looked different, not in their positions, but in their quality. They felt like eyes. And the mountains around my cabin, the familiar silhouette of Greylock Ridge, now seemed less like a landscape and more like the jagged teeth of a vast, sleeping jaw. I packed a bag that night. As I loaded my car, my headlights swept the tree line. I saw them. Figures. Tall, impossibly thin, and still. Not quite trees. Their outlines shimmered like a heat haze, bending the starlight around them. They made no move toward me. They just observed. I felt a wave of that same transmitted perception, a cold, analytical assessment, like a pilot checking an instrument readout. I drove down the mountain, that resonant hum still a phantom vibration in my bones. I moved into a city apartment. No radio, no shortwave, just the numb buzz of urban life. I was safe, I thought, until 2 nights ago. I was washing dishes, the faucet running. The water's sound changed. It wasn't hitting the stainless steel. It was hitting stone. The drip, drip, drip echoed. And beneath that echo, so faint I almost missed it, was the signal. Not from a radio, from the pipes. A single, repeated phrase in that grinding, stony voice. Control advised. Prepare for vector change. It's in the grid, in the wires, in the water. It's not broadcasting to be heard. It's broadcasting to map, to qualify. My air traffic control logs were my resume, and I've been reviewed. I don't know what traffic they want me to direct. I don't think it's airplanes. And the worst part? The signals descriptions, the folded city, the bottomless lake. I miss them. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I find myself craving that distorted voice, that expansion of my mind into impossible geometries. It felt like truth, and I fear that one day I'll tune back in, not with a radio, but with something deeper, and I'll give them the clearance they're waiting for. A signal that maps more than geography. It maps minds. It finds the controllers, the listeners, and it recruits. Mara's story is a terror of infiltration, where the very waves that connect our world become the threads of a snare we can see. Story 5. The Custom at Crossroads Inn. Our final story. The most ancient, and in some ways, the most personal. This comes from Henry, a historian who specialized in forgotten travel routes. He sought a night's shelter at an old coaching inn that still observed a peculiar custom. A custom meant not for hospitality, but for appeasement. I'm Henry, 47, a historian of trade and travel. My work is in ledgers, diaries, the dust of old roads. I found reference to the Crossroads Inn in a 19th century merchant's journal. It mentioned a custom of the hearth that guaranteed a safe night for those who know and respect the old ways. Intrigued, I tracked it down. A lonely, gabled building where two forgotten county roads met in a deep wood. The innkeeper, Mr. Crow, was a silent, watchful man. The place was empty. When I went to pay, he didn't give me a key. He gave me a brass bell, old and green with patina. "Ring this," he said, his eyes not meeting mine. "Once at midnight. Once at 3. Not before. Not after. Place it on the hearth in your room. Do not open your door after the second ringing, no matter what you hear on the stairs." He said this not as a warning, but as simple instruction, like telling a guest where to find the towels. I laughed it off. A charming bit of theatrical folklore. My room was large, with a giant stone fireplace. I set the bell on the mantel. Midnight came. To play along, I rang the bell once. A clear, high, lonely tone that hung in the air. I went to bed. I was woken at 2:45 by a sound from the chimney. A soft, scrabbling click, like many dry sticks being rubbed together. It descended. Then silence. The room grew cold. Deathly cold. My breath plumed. I stared at the hearth, a black maw in the wall. At 3, my hand trembled as I reached for the bell. I rang it. The tone seemed weaker, swallowed by the cold. The moment the sound faded, the knocking began. Not on my door. On the fireplace backplate, from inside the chimney. A slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. Then a sound of shifting weight, of something large settling onto the hearthstone I couldn't see. And then breathing. A wet, rattling inhalation, followed by a long, sighing exhalation that carried the smell of cold ashes, old blood, and distant, frost-bitten soil. I stopped breathing. The thing in my fireplace was listening. I could feel its attention like a physical pressure, a predatory focus trained on the space between my bed and the hearth. The cold was leaching the warmth from my bones. My teeth wanted to chatter, but I clenched my jaw shut, terrified it would hear. Then, the voice. It didn't come from the fireplace. It seemed to form in the cold air itself, a whisper woven from the rustle of dead leaves and the crackle of dying embers. It was ancient, hungry, and deeply, fundamentally pleased. A bell rung true, it sighed. A toll well paid. It wasn't talking to me. It was acknowledging the ritual, the custom. I heard a heavy, languid movement from the hearth, the scrape of something hard on stone. It was turning. It was now facing into my room. I could see nothing in that perfect blackness, but I knew. I felt its gaze crawl over the blankets, over my frozen form. It was taking inventory. Warm blood. The air voice rasped, a statement of fact. Brittle bones. Sweet fear. A long, wet sniffing sound echoed up the flue. This one knows the old roads. His mind is paved with them. A tasty map. I understood then. The bell wasn't a charm. It was a dinner bell. The custom wasn't for protection. It was a treaty. The inn was built on its lair. The toll of the bell at specific hours signaled that a guest was present, a guest who consented to the rules. And the rule was simple: stay in your room, and it takes only a taste, a memory, a fragment of your essence. Open the door, break the custom, and the whole meal was forfeit. I lay there, paralyzed, as it began to feed. Not on my body, on my mind. Vivid flashes of my research assailed me. The feel of brittle parchment, the smell of archived dust, the routes of Roman legions and medieval peddlers. And each memory was pulled from me, savored, and extinguished, leaving a cold, hollow blankness in its place. I was being curated, edited. Just before dawn, the scraping sound returned. It was retreating back up the chimney, slower now, satiated. The cold began to recede. The last whisper coiled into my ear. Your roads lead everywhere, little historian. I shall walk them all in time. At first light, I was a shell. I stumbled downstairs. Mr. Crow was polishing the bar. He looked at me, at the hollows under my eyes, and gave a single, slow nod. No sympathy, just confirmation. The custom was observed, he said. It wasn't a question. I never wrote about the inn. I've abandoned my research. Because sometimes, when I'm walking a lonely road or reading an old text, I feel a familiar, subtle coldness at the back of my neck. And I catch a scent on the air, cold ashes and frost. It's following the roads in my mind. It's a connoisseur of memory. And I fear my lifetime of study has provided it with a feast that will last for centuries. The custom isn't over. For me, it was just the first course. 5 stories. 5 fractures in the world we think we know. A climber on a forgotten bridge. A warden in the stone. A developer in the darkroom. A broadcaster in the static. A gourmand in the hearth. Each, a dangerous truth wearing the skin of a tale. They remind us that the unknown does not always lurk in distant wilderness. It lives in the frequency of your radio, the grain of your photograph, the history of the ground you stand on, and the old customs you dismiss as folklore. It listens, it learns, and it remembers. If you have a story of your own, a crack in your reality you dare not speak of aloud, the comments below are a sanctuary. Share it. You are not alone in the dark. For now, this channel is your bell, a toll against the silence. Help us keep the custom. Like this video, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. This has been Nightbound Bloodline. Thank you for listening. Until next time, sleep with one eye open. The end.